Hey everybody, this is Nathaniel Provencio. I'm with my new friend Jennifer. What's going on? How you doing?
I'm just living the dream. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm in Syracuse, snowy Syracuse, New York. You're outside of Philly, right?
I am, and it's been kind of rainy, kind of a little chilly. It's been all over the map with the temperatures. So
Oh, I
let's
tell
have
you,
a snowy Christmas.
yeah, I want a snowy Christmas too. Now, I live outside of DC, and typically we do not get snow during Christmas. It's usually like in February and March, so we always kind of miss it. But it's interesting. You're in the school. You're a 12th grade English teacher. Is that correct?
I am, and I have been in the classroom since 2000.
Wow, that's when
Yeah.
I started too. Wow, so you're hanging in there a lot longer than I did. So that's pretty awesome.
Mhm.
I was talking a little bit today. I was in a school and this kid brought in their backpack they brought their cat to school. And so I it was really blew my mind and there was like a metal detector in the school. And so all the kids have to put their backpack through this metal detector and as I was walking in this was happening and the backpack started to meow and the security officer was like, oh, what the heck's going on over here? So they open it up and sure enough there's a black cat that the kid wanted to bring to show and tell. So I miss those experiences when I'm in a school, man. I do miss those
It
experiences.
must have been elementary school, right?
Yes, it's
Yeah.
absolutely an elementary school. It was actually a pre-K through 8 school, but I think the kid was like in fourth or fifth grade or something like that. So it was pretty cute. It's pretty cute. Now I saw your work. I know the you know this the show is always called the Community Connection, and our connection is Eric Francis. So I think he
Yeah.
recommended me. He's like, hey, Jennifer would be a great person to talk to. Reach out to her, look at her stuff online. She's got some really cool things going on. So I'm like, yeah, sure, awesome. So I really appreciate you reaching out and joining us and sharing a little bit about your craft. You and I were talking, and you discovered something in the corporate world that could really be amazing in the education world. I'm fascinated by this. So please share with me what you got. Let's talk about it.
Sure. It's like, oh God, where to start? So I had been on a sabbatical around 2016, 17, because I had written a little children's book,
Oh yeah.
Giving Your Kid a Million Kisses, and the neuroscience behind it. And so I really wanted to lean in more about the brain, and because that's where all learning takes place, right?
Mm,
So did some work in Baltimore, got my training there. One thing led to another, and I received my appreciative inquiry training at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland.
mm,
And as I was learning about what this thing is, um, it just kept on resonating with me. Everything I believe in education that I think we need has this name, and it's appreciative inquiry. So I started using these principles that I learned in the classroom. Since I do brain based, trauma informed, culturally responsive teaching,
mm,
I started taking some of these principles and embedding it in my professional development that I would do.
mm,
And it just elevated the conversation. And then I thought, could I adapt this as a lesson or unit plan? And it worked. Could I use this as a leadership model and a type of manifesto for all the changes that we have in schools? The whole thing behind appreciative inquiry is to bring in multiple perspectives and have collective buy-in and help
mm.
navigate that change. As you know, there's so many changes that are always happening in schools.
Oh yeah.
We might get a survey, and that's the amount of input we get. I think people don't know what they don't know, and once they do, to realize that bringing people together, it can kind of be scary because
Mm.
who knows, you put a bunch of people together with diverse perspectives, what's going to happen. But at its core, if you ask a positive question, you're going to get a positive answer. It's
Mm.
that simple, but yet there's so much neuroscience behind it that I just could, you know, talk forever about it, really.
Well, let's dig into it. Appreciative inquiry. All right. So let's say you and I are in the same, we're in the same team. All right. So we're in the same school team. Um, is this something, this appreciative inquiry, or is this something that's kind of led by the admin, by the department head? Is that something that we kind of hold each other like accountable to do? Talk me through the logistics of something like creating a culture of appreciative inquiry. What would that look like?
Sure, thanks. See, and it's not like a curriculum, it's not a program, which is really difficult to try to get people to adopt it or for me to go into schools because it's like, well, what is it? It's a mindset.
Okay.
It's the way you view things, it's the way you choreograph a conversation that will energize and inspire. So you're
All
talking
right.
about teams, right? You have a PLC, you get together, you're comparing data for the assessments. By nature, we're trained to go to where kids aren't doing well,
Mm-hmm.
solve that problem. Whereas appreciative inquiry would say, well, wait a minute, this group really in the past didn't do well and they knocked it out of the park. We're just kind of like, yay, and let's move on and
Mm-hmm.
get to the ones where they were struggling.
Mm-hmm.
Pause and say, wait a minute, what was going on that they did so well?
Mm-hmm.
Analyze that, take those elements, and then apply it to the opportunity for growth.
Hmm.
So you're just flipping it.
There is kind of like the default mode of it's almost like deficit thinking, right? And this is interesting, and I'm going to pick your brain on this. I do a lot of work in a lot of schools, and it's so interesting. Like when the teams are looking at something like benchmark data, where it's like a certain point of time, how many standards were going to be covered on an assessment, in this 3 month period or whatever. And then you and I are the teachers and we look at the data and then we see, 30% of the kids passed, 40% did this. And then it's not really that data sometimes doesn't give us any information of how we taught it. It just gives us information of how the students performed. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And then it's almost
Yes.
like autopsy data in a way. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, and sometimes by design of that data piece, the way it's assessed, and the way it's laid out, it's just all output data and not input data. So like I like this fact of this appreciative inquiry, not of looking at not what all did the students miss, but what did they get right? Why did they get it right? And then what worked? What strategies, what methodologies actually worked, either as an individual or as a team, that we can leverage to reproduce so that we can get higher results. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I was going through, we have some peer to peer observation opportunities that our instructional coach has set up. And I went into a math class and I do English. So to see students, they were picking like red strings, doing something, and
Mm-hmm.
noodles, because the noodles can't break, but the string's flexible. It's maybe parabolas. I don't know.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, and it was tactile. And they said the students love it. And they do really well on this particular assessment because they can manipulate it and they can see it and it gets
Mm-hmm.
out of this abstract to something
Mm-hmm.
right in front of them. So then if that's what they're really good at and helps them to perform well, to have a PLC with like history teachers, science teachers, and say, well, in math class, they're manipulating things and made it more real. How might we do that in the social studies class? How might we do that with grammar? And it's thinking like, well, if they like to move things around, let's just put the sentence and do sentence diagramming or whatever, and just have them move the words around like the magnetic poetry. And you might not ever have thought about that
Mm-hmm.
unless you had analyzed what was working in another area.
Mm-hmm. The I feel like educators, I've got this term that I'm trying to like, I don't know, coin. It's like pedagogical PTSD, right?
Mm,
You know what I mean? It's like there's so many things that are done to educators. We feel like there's no real ownership sometime or autonomy or engagement in our practices. And I think that very technical term of appreciative inquiry goes back to have our teachers been put into cultures where they do feel like they're appreciative, or are the cultures where it's teach, test, hope for the best, move on to the rest kind of thing? And then we look at those data points and it is kind of like a deficit kind of mindset with that. And it's like, hey, listen, how did you do? How did I do? We didn't do good. And it's kind of like we're scared to share, because if we share, maybe some practices or we share our data points, we feel like we're shut down a little bit. That's kind of like that PTSD. And talk about neuroscience, it's a very um what's this? So you got the dopamine, right, which is good. You got the serotonin, which
Hmm.
I think that's good. And then you
Yep,
got
that's good.
like the oxytocin. I don't know if that's good or not,
Oh, we
right?
want a lot of that.
We
Yeah.
want a lot of oxytocin, and
Yeah.
then there's the cortisol, and that's the bad shit, right? Like the
Yeah.
cortisol is bad, like. But I think we have these cortisol rushes oftentimes because like data. That's why we think data is a four-letter word, or like we're afraid to share our practices because that vulnerability maybe not be they haven't had practice with that appreciative inquiry, and so I could almost see where we almost do that to each other. You know what I mean? Like it's almost like, yeah, but what's next? Kind of conversation. Yeah, good job, but what's next? And then I also fear sometimes, Jennifer, like the it's almost like compliance cultures where our teachers have to use these materials and they have to use this curriculum with that F word, right? Fidelity, right? They have to take this and they're given pacing guide and they're not guidelines. They feel like they're like absolutely have tos. And then we just have to get through everything and we got to use this curriculum and it almost absolves um, our teachers of any kind of professional capacity. And they don't hear that appreciative inquiry enough. Well, what worked well? Let's double down on that. Or you did an amazing job with this. Or even, all right, so you got a 20% pass rate. It's not all bad. You know what I mean? You didn't get a 0% pass rate. So obviously some students are resonating with something. In your experience, like when you're talking with teachers, I mean, do you feel like that pedagogical PTSD is an actual thing? I mean, I'm just curious your thoughts are on
Oh, PTSD.
that.
Yeah, absolutely. And like to like the actual psychological condition, right?
Mm,
Because it is a real thing. And when you have so many things coming at you and you're getting that adrenaline and cortisol, and then you have the classroom and the kids are stressed, you're one upping, and you have this negative spiral.
mm,
And then you're coming together, you're analyzing data, you're, the term of like weaponizing data.
mm.
So yes, like that's when you have teachers who just say, that's it, I'm out, and they just quit,
Yeah.
right? And you have so much burnout. So you can have this complex PTSD where it's just draining you over time.
Mm,
Um, COVID did a lot of that.
mhm.
And, you were talking about having an appreciative culture. I speak at a lot of conferences and sometimes I'll go to these workshops, how to build positive cultures. And now that I know what appreciative inquiry can do, where it's just the way you have positive regard for each other, you're
Mhm.
inviting multiple perspectives, you're validating people, you're involving them in the decision making process,
Mm.
that will build a positive culture. When you have teachers whose buckets are so empty,
Yep.
and the only way to fill it is having a drink cart or having these themes, and it's like, you know what?
Jeans Day. Yay.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like I would rather just not have that luncheon
Yeah.
every so often and bring me to the decision table,
Mm.
not the banquet table.
Oh, I like that. Oh,
Right.
that's
I
good.
just thought of that, but
Oh, yeah, that's good. We're gonna write that one down. Decision table, not the banquet table. You mentioned culture. A lot of our podcast guests, we've been leaning into this concept of culture, and um, I think culture is synonymous with leadership. And so, you could have a school saying, yeah, we have a positive culture. We have an appreciative inquiry culture, or we have a crappy culture, or we have a negative culture, or we have a toxic culture or dysfunctional culture. I really think that's just synonyms for examining leadership. I think if a leader is coming to the table, I could be wrong, Jennifer, but if a leader has a heart of an appreciative mindset, where we're not finding fault, um, we're finding opportunities to appreciate not what you're not doing, but what you're doing great, and how we double down on that. If leadership is active, it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You get what you look for,
yes, yes,
right?
100%.
So if I'm looking for excellence, I'll find excellence. If I'm looking for failure, I'll find failure. If I'm looking for, admonishing deficits, I'll probably find that. That's a leadership thing. So how do leaders, where would you guide leaders for doubling down on this research, the neuroscience of an appreciative inquiry? Where would you guide leaders for analyzing their habits and how they're talking to people and how they're guiding people to be more appreciative with their inquiry? Where would you start?
Well, I think a lot of times leaders think building a positive culture means you have to be a motivator and you
Mm-hmm.
got to, be inspirational, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would say that what you can do as a leader is to appreciate the opportunities of everyone to be a leader. You were talking about agency,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think you mentioned that earlier.
Mm-hmm.
If not, I'm mentioning it now. But to be able to ask questions to people where they're able to rely upon their expertise, supported with data, of course, is always good, and to say, this is the situation that we're working with. How might we together do XYZ?
Mm-hmm.
And it's really about the way you ask the question.
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing this work now since 2017, so it's been a while. And when I work with organizations, school districts, with like strategic planning or what's our new initiative implementation, the way you ask the question and get people to discuss it, have some design thinking,
Mm-hmm.
capture artifacts so that we can actually follow up with it. And it's not just a conversation that leads to nothing. That's where you get real meaningful change. And when people are able to be asked these questions over long term
Mm-hmm.
and it's consistent, that's when you get the buy-in. Wow, they're really listening to me. They really care. And I think most reasonable people, if you ask my input about things,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not going to go my way all the time. Maybe it's a third, but I can accept that if you
Mm-hmm.
keep on asking me. And I
Mm-hmm.
can say, well, maybe I'm just the outlier that thinks this way and everyone's thinking that way. But
Wow.
when you continue to engage people in that process, that's where you get that culture. So it's appreciating not just, you did a good job, or I so appreciate you, I'm so grateful for you, but the appreciation is what you appreciate will appreciate. So you
Mm-hmm.
want more and you want to invite more of that in every area.
Mm. Do, is that a natural inclination for people? Is that natural? I mean, I know, look, I love a good gossip. I love to vent. You know what I mean? Sometimes I just need to hey, listen, I gotta get this off my mind. And I've been teaching a while, right? I think you and I talked. We've been teaching about the long time. We've been in those meetings where it was just is just it's just a completion. We're just complaining. And
Ah,
you know what I mean. And it's like it becomes. I don't even. And we talked a little bit about data, and we've talked about some other things. But like an appreciative inquiry, our poor students get the shaft. Oh, these kids can't do this. Oh, just wait till you get that group of students. Oh
mhm.
gosh, those Provencio kids. Oh my, have you had Nathaniel? Oh my, have you had Eli the brother? Oh, you think Nathaniel's bad? Wait till you get Eli. Oh my goodness. And then it almost, and that is contagious. Like toxicity in a building, Jennifer, is contagious.
Mhm.
And it's interesting. And I've seen teams where they disparage students or they disparage, the teacher or the program or the principal, and they do it and nobody speaks up. Nobody calls it out. And then that becomes the role model or the mentor for those new teachers or someone looking for guides. And then it just becomes this echo chamber of toxicity and complete opposite of inquiry. It's not that these are bad people, it's that that's the ecosystem that's been created for them because they didn't have those norms that you were just talking about of what it means to have an appreciative culture, or leadership is not doubling down on that. I'm curious your input on that because I know you've seen it because I
Mhm.
see it all the time.
Well, and there's an answer for that with the neuroscience because we have been trained that we need to avoid the things that are going to harm us, right? You're
Mm.
picking berries and don't eat the red ones because you're going to get really, really sick. So that, I mean, that makes sense. So you really need to retrain your brain to wordsmith things and basically like do the exact opposite of what you thought, what you think you should do. So, um, I'm writing a book with my co-author, and it's a trail of conversations, and we have 5 core competencies on how to build the capacity to be appreciative.
Oh.
And part of it, there's a great book. What is it? Conversations Worth Having.
Mm.
And they have this thing called name it, flip it, frame it. So
Name it,
you,
flip it, frame it. Oh, let's
right,
talk about that. Name it, flip it,
right.
frame it.
So basically, what's the problem? Name the problem, flip it, and then you frame a question around it. And so I've taken that principle and built it into the different capacities that we have. We have the whole metaphor of going on a hero's journey,
Okay.
because the call to adventure is, there's this thing, appreciative inquiry. Are you ready to go on this adventure? And so we have, it's a trail of conversation. So it's the acronym. So that name it, flip it, frame it is embedded into some of the 5 that we guide when we coach administrators.
Let's do it. Let's practice one. I'm going to be negative, Nathaniel,
Okay.
and you're going to frame it, flip it. What is it? name,
It's name it, flip
name
it,
it.
frame it. And that's the book where we took that and we just said framing. So that's the R of the trail, is
Okay.
to reframe.
All right. Let's do it. So I'm negative, Nathaniel. Jennifer, you're going to help me out. We're good buddies. We're going to do
Sure.
this. We're going to do it. All right. Um, my data sucks. I just took this stupid district made benchmark test, and 50% of my kids failed. And the other 50%, they did okay. But I'm so frustrated because half of the stuff that was on the test, I haven't even got to yet. I don't know what idiot made that pacing guide, but they're setting me up for failure. And Jennifer, I got an evaluation, and my data is going to be part of that evaluation. I'm so frustrated.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sorry that you're going through that. And I'm wondering, have you had a chance to look through? Because you said you haven't covered half of the material,
Mm-hmm.
and you also said that half the students passed. So I'm wondering if there's a positive correlation of what you covered, they actually did well on. So if we're only halfway through the year, I can easily see that by the end, if you really look at what you did with that 50%, by the end of the year, you'll have 100%, right? And so what I'm thinking is, if you go through and look at some of the students that surprised you at how well they did,
Mm.
pull them up, pull them over and say, you know what, I'm really so pleased. And I appreciate how you really put a positive effort into that. And can you tell me, like, what worked? What did I do in the classroom? What activities do you think really helped contributed to you getting those answers right? Because I want to do more of that in the second half of the year so we can get from the 50% to 100%.
50%'s an F. You know what I mean? So I hear you. I just feel so beaten down by all this data. And then, like we got winter coming up. So I hope that I can get through everything, right? But we're going to be missing all the school and all, you got February with all the holidays and everything. And I got to get another one. My fear is that the 50% that got it are the 50% that are on grade level anyway, and that the other 50% aren't on grade level. So this is what I'm really concerned with. I'm just wondering, is it the students or is it my practices?
Hmm. Well, the students who are not on grade level does definitely present a challenge. And I'm
Mm.
wondering, have you had an opportunity to talk with your instructional coach? Because I'm wondering, they might be able to come in, observe, and give a lot of ideas for you. And also wondering about, if you, when you have your next PLC, to ask, like, what were some things that worked really well the past couple of weeks? Because it's really tough when you're by yourself, just working really hard on your own. And I don't know the last time you had some positive conversations with your colleagues, because, I tend to say that PLCs can devolve into people love complaining.
Mm,
But I'm wondering what would happen if you really made a concerted effort to have positive questions when you are having those conversations. And I think you'll see you'll get more motivated, you'll be more energized. People will start giving suggestions on what was working instead of perseverating on the problem, right? And I think you mentioned toxic. Just to
mm.
be clear, it's not toxic positivity by saying, oh, everything's wonderful, right?
That's
You know, the
right.
house is burning down, but boy, it's nice and warm.
That's right.
It's about really saying, do we want to keep on complaining, or do we want to transform that
Yeah.
culture to one where we're focusing on what's working and just generating more of that?
Yeah, I like that. It's, and I think that the more people actively practice that, um, I think the better and the easier it is, because you're right. It's not necessarily a natural kind of inclination for people to just jump to um, what's possible versus what's a problem. So I like that. Um, I wonder if appreciative inquiry is tied in any way to goal setting, and then not only meeting the goals but approaching the goals. I wonder what your thoughts are with that.
Yes. So a lot of it is based upon a cycle that we do,
Mm,
and it brings in some design thinking. So we have 6 A's, and one of them is to articulate.
mm.
And that would be like the design where you're setting those measurable goals. And how do we know when we've met them and are successful with it?
Oh,
Um,
there
but
we go.
it's really about having like these aspirational goals and really thinking, what would that look like? What would that
Mm.
sound like? And bringing some visioning work to it, which sounds a little kind of woo woo.
Yeah.
But when you get into that fix the problem, you get in the fight or flight. But when you start to bring in some element of curiosity, wonder, and play, it gets you out of your head
I
and
agree.
more into your heart
Yeah.
and say, this is why. If you imagine the outcome that you want and you start to get excited about that and reverse engineer it just like you do with the lesson plan, then that's how you start to get people united. And especially if you have a certain vision or mission for the year as a building leader, to ask them not to come along with you, but to co-create it.
Mm, I like that. So I like, I'm a sucker for an acronym. I still want to know what trail stands for, and I want to know what these 6 A's stand for. So what does trail, can you work that? Can you work that out? What does that stand for?
Sure. So for the T, that's for tapping, and you tap into strengths,
Tap into strengths. I like it.
right? So what are people doing really well? Peter Drucker said, when you combine everyone's strengths, weaknesses become irrelevant.
Mm,
And that's where that really comes alive in PLCs
hmm.
and team time, um, cross-curricular planning,
Sure.
right? So the reframing the past to go into the future
Yep.
is so important because that gets you again, um, going from the past and going to the future gets you more excited about where we're going instead
Love
of
it.
getting stuck in that past.
Yeah.
Asking positive questions yields a positive outcome. I mean, just think about very simple. If you ask a kid, like, why are you always late? That's going to make them defensive. That's
Sure.
certainly going to create a sense of belonging.
Yep.
But if you say, hey, what can I do to help you get here on time?
Mm.
Right? I mean, that's so simple.
Or I'm
And
glad you're here for one thing. Thanks for
oh,
showing up.
oh, sure. And there's so many things about culture. Like one thing, like first period, never ask a kid in first period, why weren't you here? That's
Oh
you know.
my goodness. That's good. That's a good
So
point.
right. Or to be talking like a classic one would be looking at the positive data. Oh my gosh, the kid's late 4 days out of the week every time. Well, when is he here on time? Oh, Tuesdays. Why Tuesdays?
Mm.
Because of this. And then it's like, okay, now we can be solutions based.
Yeah, sure.
I is for inviting multiple perspectives,
Like it.
and that cross pollinates. And then finally, leading to empower others will support sustainable change.
Wow. Now, you said that you got this from the business world, right? So you mentioned
Yes.
Peter Drucker. I was just my podcast. We just did a podcast with Dr. Neil Gupta. We talked about Malcolm Baldrige and some other types of aspects. So I'm all about this.
Mhm.
Have you done some work in the corporate world with this type of uh, framework?
I've supported others who are newer to appreciative inquiry.
Mm.
I have done work with, I guess the furthest thing away from education was a criminal justice department
Oh, wow.
and like district attorney's office, where
Yeah.
they needed help with their strategic plan because they had to have an equity action plan. And
Mm.
so I worked with them and talking about inviting multiple perspectives. We had the DA, we had lawyers, we had community members, we had people with lived experience
Mm.
in the criminal justice, and we put them all together to
Wow.
imagine an equitable experience. And again, like you would think that would be kind of scary having someone who had been through the system
Sure.
with a figurehead who was responsible for putting them there. People were laughing. There
That's
was
awesome.
one gentleman, he was the star of the show. And by the end of implementing the action plan, they actually created a leadership role for him
Oh,
in
wow.
helping to find sustainable housing once people are out and to avoid the recidivism.
That's outstanding. That's so cool, man. That's so dope. All right, so that's the trick. That's the trick. What was the L? What was the L again?
Leading to empower others.
Leading to empower others, which is kind of like the goal, right? That's like a huge goal to be able to do. And then you've got 6 A's. Tell me about these 6 A's.
Sure. So, you know, as an English person, I love words and I like to make everything spell something or have a harmony where it's the same letter,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the original one for appreciative inquiry is a 5D cycle. So you have discover, dream, design, deploy. You have all of that.
Yeah.
So I added it was a 4, then it was a 5, because if people start researching appreciative inquiry, which came in the 80s,
Hmm.
around the same time as Martin Seligman's positive psychology,
Mm.
right? So they're very, very, very aligned.
Sure.
And so it was a 4D cycle, then it was a 5. I added a step to do what's next. And it's normally when you are doing a summit. So
Mm.
if you have like the beginning of the year where you have all your PD days, to
Mm-hmm.
almost treat it like a conference or a summit, you bring people together. The first is you align. You
Align.
align, yes, you align on the positive outcome you would want.
Okay.
And it's an affirmative topic,
Like it.
right? Then going into that affirmative topic, you might ask a question, say, like, I know a lot of schools right now, a big buzzword is engagement, student
Hmm.
engagement or student voice,
Mm.
which I was told from someone, don't use that phrase voice because it's ableist, because not everyone has a voice. Hearing impaired,
Okay.
autism, right? So
Sure.
student agency, student leadership, student empowerment. So let's say that's the question. So we
Okay.
align on that affirmative topic. How might we have robust, authentic student agency in class? Or
Hmm.
how might students be leaders in their own classroom?
Okay.
So then you go to affirm. What can we affirm we have been doing well already in that area?
Mm. I like it.
And we take you through a conversation trail. And that's another acronym I have is CLIMB, which is
Yeah.
how to have a conversation. You have a climb of conversation.
Okay.
So you do this appreciative interview with people. I answer the question, I'll interview you. Then you and I will find another pair, and I'll say, listen, Nathaniel was talking about this great time in his classroom with where students were be able to do student-centered learning. They picked their own topics, they
Mm-hmm.
created this thing. And so we start to then theme out these words.
Hmm.
So what goes into all these high point moment stories? And you theme it out to about 5 words. And what's really interesting, say you do this with a building of teachers, maybe you have 80 teachers,
Yeah.
80 individual stories, 80
Oh.
different experiences. But when they start listening to each other and writing things on post-it notes, and then all these different things, it's like, okay, well, what did Nathaniel's question answer have in common with mine? And the
Mm.
music teacher versus and what's really interesting is all those different tables of all these different stories. it's the same words that come up.
Oh, that's awesome.
So then you start to aspire and say,
Mm,
if we were to have more of these different positive qualities, what
yeah.
would that look like? And you really start to do that visualization. Once you see it, you can achieve it. So you articulate the plan and you
Mm,
write it out, like just like the coordinates on a map. You
okay.
plot that out. Then finally you activate it, you set it into action. The sixth one is to adapt
Hmm.
because you always have to adapt to change, right? And
Mm,
what you don't adapt to dies. So Peg Wheatley says that, you have to adapt or die. That's
yeah,
nature. And
that's right.
that's part of appreciative inquiry is all these principles of appreciative inquiry are biomimicry. It's imitating nature. Most
Mm,
things grow to the light.
mm,
Most things have to adapt, right? That's why this background here that I have,
yeah.
um, can you tell what it is?
It is a tree in South Carolina that is one of those old growth trees that kind of like grow out forever. It's like a heritage tree or something. I don't know. I'm just making it up. Is that it?
It is a tree, but some people think it's neurons.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
dendrites and
I
stuff, isn't that
gotcha. I
right?
gotcha.
So when you have like a lightning bolt and a neuron firing look the same.
They
When
look
you
the
have
same.
a pair of lungs look the same
The
as a tree.
bronchial tubes. Yeah.
Yep, look as the same as a tree.
Oh,
And
that's
you'll see
dope.
and a lot of inventions mimic. So like it's so simple, but planes have wings, birds
Yeah.
have wings,
Love it.
right? So the same thing where if we really start to mimic nature, we will flourish just like nature flourishes.
Yeah.
And that permaculture mentality,
Hmm.
when you have the water meets the land is the most fertile,
That's right.
just when you bring different perspectives together, that's where it's going to be most fertile of the ideas.
I love it. Man, that's like a cycle of inquiry I think you could use for like anything, like any problem. I mean, like you can get people together and go through those 6 A's. I mean, that's awesome. I can't wait to read it. I can't wait to read your book. Who's your co-author? You mentioned a co-author. Who's your co-author?
Yeah, her name is Heidi Marlinghouse, and she was an elementary school teacher for a long time. And she also had done some work with the Toolbox Project
Yeah.
and very big into SEL. And we met through a mutual friend when I received my training at Case Western.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, do you have a date when the book's going to be coming out?
We don't have a date yet because we're looking for the right publisher, the right fit. However, if you go on to a trailofconversations.com,
Okay.
there's a mini book that is
Oh,
like the first third or so of the book that we're currently writing.
yeah. That's really awesome. So I can't wait for that book to come out. I hope you find the right publisher. I hope that I'm going to go and look at that. You said it was like the kind of like the micro kind of like book on the website, right? Is it?
Yes.
What's the
Mhm.
website again?
A trail of conversations
Trail of
dot
Convers
com dot com.
trailofconversations.com. I
Mhm.
absolutely love it.
Yes.
So I love it. Well, hang back with me, Jennifer, and thank you very much for joining us on the Community Connection.